Episode 4: Outcomes and End Goals. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about what an end goal is, what an outcome is, how we use it in NLP, a metaphorical description of an outcome, my own experience, case study, an exercise, an approach for you to use, and finally a summary on what's next. So what is an outcome in NLP? As I mentioned, it's an end goal. But the important thing is that we make them big, we make them bold, because the purpose of an outcome is really to set a direction. It's not so important that we actually reach the outcome, because the outcome is far away, and by the time it comes to it, we may actually achieve something different, but better. The purpose of an outcome is so we have a clear direction that means that we're excited enough to take the action that we need to do to take the steps at the beginning. Because if we have both an end goal and we start to take steps, we will go much further than if we didn't have either. So the important thing about an outcome is that it is something that is big and motivating. And as soon as an outcome ceases to be big and motivating, then we want to change it and come up with something that is big and motivating. So how do we use outcomes in NLP? As I said, it wants to be big and motivating. However, we use the NLP outcomes process so that you can put any idea that you've got through a number of questions and tests to make it easier for you to understand that at the end of it, is it something you really want? And if you do want it, you'll find that you're now thinking about it in a way that makes it much easier to achieve. Or on the other hand, you may actually decide it's something you don't want. And it's far better to know up front before you put lots of work into getting it to decide that it's something that you don't really want. A metaphorical description of an outcome is really like a searchlight. It's like having a really big, powerful searchlight that goes a long way out into the future. So you can actually see your end goal clearly and without any doubt. And it's also bright enough to light up anything in its way that may be initially a bit of a challenge or a problem. However, the idea is that the end goal is so exciting that actually pushing through those obstacles will actually be quite fun, will actually be a positive challenge. The interesting thing about outcomes too is that because it's a focused beam of light, it means that your full attention is on what you need to do to achieve it. And almost by definition, you'll tend to ignore the things that are not in the searchlight. So curiously enough, some things in life, some things that are particularly important for you to get, you do want to set as outcomes. However, there are times in life you may want to enjoy the journey. You may want to see things outside of that searchlight. So I'm not going to suggest you want outcomes for everything. Sometimes you just want to relax and have fun and explore whatever comes up. However, it's always worth having a one or two clear outcomes for yourself, if for no other reason that if you don't set outcomes for yourself, other people will set them and they may not be to your advantage. A case study about outcomes. I was working with a client who was getting really pissed off with his boss, something that I suspect has happened to all of us at sometimes in our careers. And he was getting really demotivated. And obviously the more demotivated he was, the worse his relationship with his boss was getting. So we sat down and the objective was to come up with something that would get him remotivated. And as a part of our discussions, we started exploring about what might excite him. And after a bit of time, we came to the conclusion that he really had this dream of running his own business. And so we worked through the plan of what this business might be, what he might need to do to set up with it. And you could tell in talking to him as he sort of started developing the plan, he suddenly genuinely became interested. Again, you could see his eyes light up because it was something that was very important to him. So he worked through the plan of what he needed to do to get a business. And he realized that one of the skills that he needed would be to manage all his various stakeholders. Now it also suddenly dawned on him that in his current job he had stakeholders that he hadn't really paid any attention to at all. So with the view that he was going to do it because he needed the skill for his business, he actually took action and made initial contact with all his stakeholders just to open a connection and communication. And he actually developed a stakeholder plan where the object wasn't to change their opinion of him straight away, but just to make contact, and those stakeholders he got on well with, make it a little bit better. Those stakeholders who really didn't like him at all, he had a plan to make them like him just a little bit. And he put in this plan, this management plan, to build on this connection with his stakeholders. And curious enough, he actually got quite into this. He actually started quite enjoying it. And curiously enough, the stakeholders started giving good reports back to his boss. So his boss sort of relaxed a bit and chilled out a bit, and then started to talk to him in a much more honest, straightforward way. And he actually developed a much better relationship to his boss. And curious enough, 2 years later, he's actually enjoying his current job so much that he's put on ice his plans to start his own business. Now, I've absolutely got no doubt that eventually he will start his own business, but I just want to get over that getting something that motivates you, getting a big goal that you start working towards, you may not get it straight away, but actually it starts all sorts of interesting things happen. If you've got something you're excited about and you start developing skills and people connections, all sorts of interesting things will happen to you. So the exploration of outcomes is genuinely powerful. Now, what's my own experience of outcomes? When I first started doing it, I tended to look at outcomes through the lens of my current position. So if I was in a situation where things weren't going perfectly, then I tended to look at outcomes, but I was always a little bit tentative about them. And the catch is, that's the wrong way to do it. The purpose of an outcome is not to worry too much about whether you're going to get it or not. And in fact, there are many reasons of choosing outcomes that actually are quite difficult, because actually that's more fun and that's more challenging. So the one thing I've learned with outcomes is let the imagination flow. Don't put any restraints on what you might want, because as you go through the later processes that we go through in this series, you'll be doing all the checks and balances anyway. But at this stage, which is about setting outcomes, just go with your imagination. Go with what you really, really, really want. Don't be too concerned that you might not get it. That is not part of the process. And that's the one thing I've learned, and it makes a lot of difference. So really enjoy setting big, bold outcomes. Use that part of the brain. Use your creativity to the full. So how do we set outcomes? What are the questions to ask? What is the process to go through? I tend to use a 5-step process, but there are lots of different variations around, and you may find one that suits you better. But give this a go to start with. The first question is what you want positive? And by that I mean, is it something that you want as opposed to something you want to avoid? For example, being healthy is something you want. Stopping smoking or losing weight is something you want to avoid. Because of the brain works, it's much more easy for your unconscious to understand something positive. I want to be healthy. I want to be a multimillionaire. Doesn't matter what it wants. Let your imagination go. But just make sure it's something you want as opposed to something that you want to avoid. First step. Second step, imagine that you've really got it. No hesitation. If you've got your wildest dreams, imagine for a moment that you're there now. What do you see? What do you hear? How do you feel? Are there any tastes and smells? Enjoy the moment. This is very important because, in a way, if you can represent it in your senses, Our senses, the way we connect with our outside world. So to your unconscious processes, you're making it real. If you don't represent it in your senses, it's really a concept in your head and is not necessarily connected to the outside world. So let your imagination reign free. Imagine you really got what you want. What do you see? What do you hear? How do you feel? What do you taste and smell? And at least be able to do that in 3 senses. The next question. Are you aware how much of the journey is under your control? One of the things that's important is that if you have a plan and a map, you're aware of what really is under your control and influence and what isn't under your control and influence. An example. Getting a job is not under your control because other people have to interview you and it's their decision that counts. However, getting the right skills and doing the activity to get a job are 100% in your influence. So concentrate on those things that you can do that are under your control rather than concentrating on the things that are under everybody else's control. And even though it may be a big goal which requires other people, make sure in your planning you focus on those things that you can do and that are under your control. And remember the thing about a job. As I say, it's under your control to get the skills. It's under your control to develop the process to go for interviews and the normal job hunting stuff. Because if you do those, you will eventually get the right job. Going for one job, remember, it might not be the right job for you. So actually it might be quite good that those people reject you because they might not be good enough for you. So focus on and be aware of the things on your journey that are under your control. The next one is it really good for you? And the question is it good for you and those people around you? Because there's no point putting lots of effort into a goal and finding when you got there that it isn't actually what you wanted. And a good check of this, a good way of testing this, is simply answering the question, if you could have it now, would you take it? Just think of one of the things that you wrote down earlier on in the series that you wanted. If you could have it now, would you take it? If the answer is a straight, simple yes, if it's a physical yes, it's probably something that's good for you. If there is any hesitation, it doesn't mean that it's bad for you, but it means there's something that it's worth exploring. So, is it something that's really worthwhile to you? 5th point is, do you know what the smallest action is to take that if you took it would help you get it? And I really want to emphasize the smallest action because some people concentrate on huge actions and don't realize that they're actually sabotaging themselves. Focus at the start on the smallest actions because if you can take big actions, you'll take them. If you have an empowering direction and you start taking small steps, then you will find that you'll automatically speed up and take big steps. So the last point is, can you enjoyably imagine yourself taking the first step? If you've got a bold direction, if you can imagine yourself enjoyably taking the first step, you have set yourself up for success. Exercise or exercises. If you remember on the very first episode of this series, you wrote down 3 or 4 things that you wanted. What I'd like you to do is take those 3 or 4 things through this process. You'll find the process is written down on the notes. Now, at the end of it, you may find that all the things you wrote down you really want. You may find that all the things you wrote down, on thinking about it, they don't really excite you. And all that means is you want to keep working on it, keep exploring new things until you find 3 or 4 things that really do excite you. So that's what your exercise is. And take your time on it and enjoy it and let your imagination go as wild as you like. To summarize, and what's next? Outcomes is hugely important because it's about setting things that will make life easy for you. It's about finding things that are exciting enough that you want to get out of bed. And when you've found them, everything becomes so much easier. What we're going to do in the next episode is actually look at where you are now. Because to plot any journey, you want your direction, because that will keep you motivated and keep you going. But you also want to be honest and open about where you are now. Where you are, what you're doing in relation to your outcomes, and what resources you might need for the journey. Because it's a balance between those two things that gives you the map that you can plan, so you can actually plan the journey to have the most amount of fun and the most enjoyment. So in the next episode, we're going to be looking at where you are now. Thank you for listening and watching. I really look forward to having you back for the next episode.